Is my girlfriend a time traveler? Unbelievable clues that make me wonder. Burner, so my main doesn't look crazy. This is probably a weird thing to put here, but it's not like I can talk to anyone in my life about it without sounding like an absolute loon. I, 26M, met my 22F girlfriend 3 years ago in my second year of college. She was out of state and didn't have many friends here. She was kind of odd for reasons I will explain later, but she was nice and we bonded over watching and shit-talking movies together. When we first got together, she told me that she was polyamorous, not interested in sex, and not looking for something long-term as she was going to move away after she graduated. It seems weird, polyamorous but not interested in sex, but actually polyamory isn't all about sex, I have learned. We came to an agreement that we would date, but we could both date and flirt with other people. I didn't think I would want this for a long-term partner, but I'm still young and experimenting, and since she doesn't really have sex, sometimes she gives me a handy but nothing more, and she always declines when I offer to return. It doesn't really bother me. Now into the weird stuff. She doesn't go into detail about her family. She's from the rural Appalachian part of Georgia. That's it. That's all I know. She won't talk in detail about anything else in her past. Always takes like 5 to 10 seconds to remember her birthday. And she can never remember if the month or day is meant to come first. She's always changing her accent depending on who she talks to. She says her brain does this automatically. But her sentence structure is weird. She sometimes uses British slang and words, says lift, flat, wanker, waffling, blackguard. How do you mean instead of what do you mean, can they instead of can't, I will do instead of I will do that. When she watches Shakespeare, she literally talks like Shakespeare for an hour after. She only has a southern accent in the morning before she has a conversation with me. We call every morning. She doesn't like texting. And when she's talking to a southerner, she does say words like holler and y'all like a southerner though. She doesn't wear modern clothes. She wears corsets and slips, and instead of bras and underwear, like there is nothing on her legs, she just wears a short dress under her corset. Unless she is wearing men's clothes, and then she wears old-fashioned looking men's underwear. Always has multiple layers of petticoats and dresses with styles from all different times. Like I'm talking vintage 50s to medieval. When we watch historical movies, she's always pointing out flaws of the accuracy, but it's not big historical events. It's stuff like, metal wouldn't have been used for that until X year. Why are her laces in the back? That's not really a thing in that era. That's not how Christmas was celebrated back then. That cutlery is inaccurate for the time. She's too old to have her hair down. Doesn't shave. Don't get me wrong, that's her choice. I just thought it was a little odd. Claims that it is a modern invention, shaving the body. Save for working women with lice. Why does she know that? And by modern invention, she means the 1920s. Obviously, she is really into history, but when I ask her where she gets her information, she can never give me sources. Just, I don't remember. It must have been in a book somewhere, or probably online or something. When I doubt all the little details she tells me, she says that it's okay that I don't believe her, but that she knows she's right. She's a scholar. She always stresses the importance of sources when I tell her things. But it's like she doesn't even care to prove the things she says. She gets irritated at things on the internet and talks about how much better the old web was. When I ask her what she means by that, she said before 2010. I was like, wouldn't you have been 8 in 2010? And she said something like, oh yeah, I guess I would have been pretty young. Whenever I bring up the fact that she never really experienced the old web as an adult or even teenager, she agrees with me and then changes the topic. Even though she's always calling out inaccuracy in media, she makes no attempt to be accurate herself. Like she mixes up all the eras. I called one of her outfits medieval and she listed every item she wore and what century, decade, even down to the exact year sometimes, to prove to me that it was not really medieval. In making her sound annoying, but really she doesn't talk about her clothes unless you specifically ask. When I called her born in the wrong time, or she was very against it. She says she doesn't feel like she missed out on any of the eras, and that she likes living in the now. I asked why she's always wearing old styles. She said just because she wears old styles doesn't mean she wants to live back then. She said that's why she doesn't do reenactment, because she has no desire to relive the past. I can't remember what it was in reference to, but she said jokingly, I've lived through the year 2012 too many times. She said it as a joke, but I didn't really understand. So I asked her, and she said she was joking. I said I knew she was. I just didn't understand what the joke was. She just brushed it off and never explained. Has a bunch of vintage USSR and American space pins. She says she's not a fan of the USSR or USA, but she was a bit of a space race fanatic back in the day. Again, she said this as a joke. Struggles to use TV. Something about the remotes and buttons confuse her. She says it's because she grew up without a TV, but then she also claims that she was on the internet pre-2010? And it's not like just a little tech savvy. She knows HTML and a bunch about like radios, cassettes, CDs, and vinyls. It is just TVs and modern computers she struggles with. I introduced her to Doctor Who and jokingly asked if she was a time traveler, and she said something like, "I've never understood the appeal of time travel. I mean, wouldn't things get confusing? Never remembering your age and always second-guessing if you were following the societal standards of the time? Maybe I just don't have a big enough imagination, but that's a lot of thought put into time travel for someone who doesn't desire to time travel." She was making a comment on trans issues, said something like, "Back in the day you could cross-dress and everyone just assumed you were that gender. It didn't take a lot to pass." I asked back in what day? And she was like pre-1850s. I asked her where she heard this because it sounded silly to me. Like, I'm not transphobic or anything, but I can tell what sex someone is by their facial features. She said something like, "Well, we told it by the clothes." I was like, "We?" And she was like, "By we I mean humans pre-1850s. Not like I was actually there." I said, "What if you were actually there, and you were actually a time traveler?" And she said something like, "I would probably have been a nun. No need to tell the men from the women in the nunnery." Where did that come from? I was like, "What's that all about?" And she was like, "Nunneries were the original sororities. Everyone thinks it's all holy, but really it's mostly lesbians. It's not sodomy if there's no penis." Where is she getting this? Speaking of cross-dressing, she does a lot. She wears men's historical fashion. I am straight, so I see her as a woman, but she told me that she was really a gender. I asked why she didn't tell people that. She said, "It's not that I'm not a woman, the definition just changed. I'm a woman of the old standard and most people assume I'm a woman, so I let them." I asked if she would prefer I use other pronouns than the girl ones, and she said that she didn't really care either way. I'm not really into gay stuff. Like, I have gay friends, so I know more than the average het guy, but they don't really talk about gender and stuff, so maybe that's not really that odd, but it seemed odd to me. And probably the weirdest thing, she's 5 feet 5 inches and average looks skinny, but weighs probably like 150 to 175. That's just an estimate from when I pick her up. When I comment on this, she says she has dense bones. What does that mean? She looks slightly underweight if anything. So why is she technically overweight? There's other stuff too, but that's all I can think of off the top of my head. I just had to vent because it's getting to me. If anyone has any advice or similar experiences, feel free to comment. Relevant comments. Beast_chips. I'm autistic, have an autistic partner, and worked with autistic people as a specialist teacher for around 7 years. This is almost certainly autism. The other explanation people have come up with would probably be offensive if they weren't so hilarious. Gary Bug, the sequel. I find it so funny that instead of thinking your girlfriend had some sort of autism, you just came to the conclusion that she's a time traveler. Update. I decided just to accuse her of time travel. Literally just called her and opened with, "I know you're a time traveler." She laughed and asked what the fuck I was talking about, and I told her, "Okay, I don't really think she's a time traveler. I just think she had been keeping things from me." I asked her if she was lying about her age. She got serious and asked me to come over because she didn't want to talk on the phone. Obviously, part of me was hoping she was going to reveal that she was a time traveler. Spoiler, she is not a time traveler. She told me that she has been lying about her age. She's 28, but started college older than usual because of a hard time getting out of her hometown and felt like she missed out on her early adolescence. She regrets it, but she had wanted to fit in. She told everyone she was 18 when she first got here, and now there was no going back. She was embarrassed to tell me because she had lied about it and didn't know how to tell me the truth. She asked me what brought on the suspicion, and I showed her this post. She laughed for like 10 minutes and thinks it's very funny that my first thought was time travel, and expressed what you all have, that the oddities were just autism. She said she might not have a diagnosis, but I guess I've been community voted now. She explained everything I was curious about and gave me permission to post it here. She grew up in a large family in rural Georgia. Her family were poor and had multiple addictions. Her dad was an alcoholic and were overall very neglectful. The community she grew up in was really behind in technology because of the poverty, and her family didn't have TV. She would spend lots of time in the local library just to be out of the house, where they had free internet access and lots of books. She found interest in historical clothing, and since she already knew how to sew due to her upbringing, modifying hand-me-downs, repairing clothes, she got really into it. She was always the least favored of her siblings, not physically abused, but ignored. When she was older, she found out that she was intersex and had a penis that was removed at birth. She thinks that's the reason her parents ignored her more than the others. They were very religious, and she thinks they saw her as a mistake in God's eyes. The bone density is probably related to her being intersex. As for the 2012 thing, it was a really traumatic year for her. She relives it a lot in her dreams. The sources thing, She says that it's important in academia, but she doesn't bother when it's just shitting on movie inaccuracies since most of it is stuff she learns for fun and then doesn't remember the sources. The accent thing, she was basically raised by online media. She was quiet growing up and avoided talking to people, so she ended up hearing and absorbing different bits of slang from all over. So, not a time traveler. But she pointed out that if she was a time traveler, she could have told me all this to cover for it. I said if she was, it was a pretty genius cover story. Thanks for enduring my silly theories. Relevant conversation. In response to OP's girlfriend saying that she was community voted as autistic. Liversteeg. Community voted, a diagnosis? Do people say this dumb shit now? OP. It was a joke, dumbass. Liversteeg. I'm not the one that thought that my girlfriend was a time traveler. She doesn't have a diagnosis, but you still refer to her as autistic in your edit. So it sounds like you're kind of subscribing to the online community-voted diagnosis idea. Writing nerdy. You realize self-diagnosis is a valid step on the path to actual diagnosis? If someone came and told you they were suffering from depression or anxiety, would you argue with them and say, but have you been professionally diagnosed? Liversteeg. That is a false equivalency. And depending on the circumstances, I might ask if they have, but I wouldn't preface it with a but. Although depression isn't technically an emotion, we know that people often use it to describe feeling deeply sad. Someone can have symptoms of depression without meeting the diagnostic criteria for a depressive disorder. Just because someone isn't clinically depressed, it doesn't mean they shouldn't seek professional treatment or that they aren't struggling with sadness. If someone came up to me and said, I'm struggling with major depressive disorder, I would ask if they were professionally diagnosed and seeking professional help. If someone just self-diagnosed themselves with major depressive disorder without ever seeing a doctor or therapist, I would tell them to see one because clearly they need treatment. I would probably explain to them that there are many different types of depressive disorders, and a professional would be able to help them better identify what they were struggling with. Anxiety is an emotion, and many people experience anxiety without having an anxiety disorder. Again, this doesn't mean they shouldn't seek help, but it would be irresponsible and inaccurate to go around saying they have an anxiety disorder. Anxiety also has many manifestations, like phobias are an anxiety disorder, and getting a proper diagnosis is important for seeking proper treatment. Self-diagnosing and armchair diagnosing should not be encouraged, and it has become a huge problem on social media. So many people casually throwing out diagnoses like autism, PTSD, DID, BPD, and people talk about OCD like it's an adjective. This is how misinformation is spread and stereotypes are enforced. It's like they are viewed as quirky traits to put in your bio. I'd be willing to bet about 95% of the people that throw out diagnoses have never glanced at the DSM-5. OP's Reddit-voted diagnosis for his GF is not valid, yet in his edit he states she has autism. Not that she might have it and is going to see a professional, but that she has it. People throw out autism all the time on Reddit based off minimal information. That 4-year-old really loves trains? Must be a touch of the tism. So quirky. TLDR, someone saying they are struggling with depression or anxiety isn't the same as self-diagnosing something like autism, PTSD, NPD, BPD, bipolar, etc. The language we use when discussing mental health is important.